Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Alan Diehl.
Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Alan Diehl. I currently serve on the board of the Interreligious Council and also am the vice president of the Humanists of Lynn County. On this morning's show, we will be attempting to answer the question, should Cedar Rapids be in the hotel business? This question has been asked on and off ever since Cedar Rapids purchased the DoubleTree Hotel in downtown Cedar Rapids back in 2010 and was the subject of much debate during the recent mayoral race. Here to discuss this question with me this morning, I have three guests. Good morning. Good morning. To my immediate left is Brian Morelli from the Cedar Rapids Gazette, who has been writing about this topic for several years. Good morning.
Thank you.
Next to him, we have Jim Conklin, who is the chairman for the Iowa Conservative Union. According to your group's Facebook page, Jim, one of your group's purposes is to promote and propagate the ideals of limited government, as well as individual freedom, personal responsibility, free enterprise, and innovative thinking in the development of fiscal and social policy. And finally, last and certainly not least, we have the mayor of Cedar Rapids, Mayor Corbett. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for joining. Again, I think we're going to have an excellent discussion this morning. I wanted to start out with you, Mr. Mayor. Could you please just give us kind of a brief history of how Cedar Rapids got into the hotel business and then maybe go from there?
After the flood of 2008, the Department of Commerce at the federal level wanted to help spur some economic development in Cedar Rapids, so they gave us a grant of $35 million to build a new convention center. The state also supplied $10 million to help build the new convention center and renovate the old Cell Center, which was a concert hall. You know, it had been built before the ADA. So we're going along with these grants to have a new convention center and remodeled Cell Center. And all of a sudden, the recession that hit, the real estate trust company that owned the hotel went bankrupt. And they tried to sell these properties individually, but this was during the recession. And a lot of the Frank Dodd regulations that were put on potential real estate buyers really prohibited any private sector company from coming in and buying the hotel. So we were really between a rock and a hard place. We have a brand new convention center being built and an arena being rehabbed, and then with the prospects of having a dark hotel. So we took the steps to buy the hotel at a very rock bottom price and invested in rehabbing the hotel. Our fear was if we didn't do something, we were going to open up a brand new convention center and an arena, and there wasn't going to be a hotel to service the people that were coming in for concerts and conventions and events.
Jim or Brian, do you have anything to add to that, or any? Does that sound about right to you? Exactly how you understand it, or?
It's about right, but the whole process, as I understand it, for the convention center started before the flood. So the fact that was shared with us that we received money following that flood, it's understanding why the federal government and other government entities would help us, but I believe that this kind of renovation for that civic center was started before the eventual bankruptcy, and I believe the company who was managing it was just doing a poor enough job that it was inevitable that they were going to go bankrupt. So
Jim's right as far as how long the community's been talking about this. I mean, the facility was built in 1978. There was a bond issue that passed for the construction of the arena portion of it, and it had fallen into disrepair. Concerts have changed, the rigging of the concerts, this was all pre-ADA. So there was a lot of discussion about the need to upgrade the Cell Center along with the convention center. But it really was the flood that kind of forced that issue for the city to make a decision on whether we were going to reinvest in this big complex.
Brian, you've been covering this for years. What are your thoughts on just kind of how the city got into this situation?
I mean, I think the city was, looking at recovering after the flood. A lot was happening, and then there was this sort of, blight in the downtown. And my understanding is, that they, how can the city come back and there's this, hole in the middle of the downtown, and then sort of being an economic catalyst was a big part of why the city jumped in.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Mayor, when the City Council was kind of looking into this, I know this is kind of a unique situation, but is there precedent in other cities for an arrangement like this, referring to the convention complex?
There are. A lot of local cities, towns own their convention centers, and in some cases they actually do own the hotel. The city owns the Paramount Theater, for example, but we're not in the theater business. We outsource that to a company that runs it and gets all the different acts and stuff. And we're not in the hotel business. We own the building, but we've outsourced that to Doubletree by Hilton. And also another example would be Kirkwood. Kirkwood College has a hotel and convention center, and they use that as part of their culinary arts. So that would be another government example of ownership of a hotel.
I think, Jim, you were going to say something.
Well, from the perspective of public-private sector partnerships, the examples that the mayor has given us that aren't the hotel are good examples of businesses that are not going to be competing against other companies. So when you take a look at the Paramount, great example, there's not going to be companies coming into this town to compete against the Paramount. When we take a look at Kirkwood, yeah, they built it, but they built it and it revolves around their education. There's not going to be a company that will come in and then help an educational process like that. With the hotel, my biggest concern was all along, why isn't the private sector bearing risk when we purchase that hotel? When you take a look at the contracts with Mr. Frew, and when you take a look at what we ended up with Doubletree, we should not be in the business of subsidizing a business that could be competitive. And I do agree with Brian, it would look like a blight, but eventually it may have needed to be just left alone. Now we have other hotels that are having difficulties competing against it. So,
do you have thoughts?
Jim's comment is fair about is the city competing, and I think the market rate is what really what the hotel owners can end up charging. I mean, you go on any of the hotel websites today. We've had many hotels that have been constructed since the city purchased the building and outsourced the management to Doubletree. And we have two other firms that are looking at changing the Guarantee Bank into a boutique hotel. So there is interest in the downtown. This was a unique deal. I think both Jim and I can agree that really the hotel isn't a core function of a city. It's roads, infrastructure, water, sewer, those types of activities, police and fire, those are core functions. So this is really outside of the core function, but it was a unique time for us after the flood, and we had to take some action. I think if you survey all the council members, including myself, that one of these days we'd like to sell this. This is a revenue-producing asset that's of value to the community and will be for many years now.
Well,
Yeah,
and
and
that's where I will disagree. But I don't think any of the council members ever expected to be stuck with the DoubleTree as the hotel. My problem goes back to the surveys that were created, especially one that claimed we were going to have a lot of conventions. When you start to take a look at that, I still don't believe the DoubleTree is paying for itself. And if it is, then we need to start telling the community that those parking lots and that arena is always going to remain the city and the county and the state's responsibility for paying for that loss.
Well, it's not the state's responsibility, but the convention center will always lose money. Convention centers always do. I don't think there's a city in America where a convention center makes money. And the concert arena can some years make money, some years not, depending on whether you buy your Barry Manilow ticket or not, or some big act that costs a lot of money. But the hotel is revenue producing, so it's making a profit and it's paying off the debt that we encountered to rehab it.
Along that line, in one of your articles, Brian, it was quoted as saying, John Frew, the city's project manager for the convention complex, said one of the reasons the city purchased the hotel attached to the arena from its creditors is that a renovated hotel is expected to generate a profit enough to make the debt payments for the renovation and purchase of the hotel. He estimated at a cost of $28 million. And to cover the projected annual operating loss of the convention complex and pay some of the annual debt payments on the convention complex. Now, my understanding is the cost was actually $48.5 million, a difference of a little over $20 million, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but that was... So my question based on that and John Frew's comments is, does the hotel profit currently cover the hotel debt payment and the annual operating losses and some of the annual debt payments on the convention complex?
It does not cover all the costs of the convention complex. So we make money off the hotel. The hotel actually profits, and it also generates the hotel motel tax when people stay at that. That money is all supporting the complex, but it doesn't cover all the operating losses of the convention center or year to year, whether the concert hall makes a profit or not. But we do have one management team, DoubleTree, that manages the entire complex. Before, we had someone different managing the convention center and someone different for the hotel. So they may not want to give a discount for rooms. Now it's all coordinated. So it's about as perfect of a situation that we can have as far as the overall management of it. And I think one of these days the hotel itself will eventually be sold and pay off the debt. But it's an appreciating asset. It's like any piece of real estate. People invest in their homes to fix them up and hope that they're going to be able to get that investment out in the future.
I think one of the questions that this comes back to is, would a private business have stepped up and done this? And the answer is no, and that's why the city stepped up and bought this hotel. So if a private business wasn't going to be able to sustain this, then it comes down to, is it worth it? Is it worth it for the city to lead the ship in this case with the hotel?
So Jim, I mean, this does seem like kind of a strategic, kind of a common sense move. I guess what the city council felt was in the best interest of taxpayers, given the convention complex. But I mean, what are your thoughts there? I mean, this kind of goes back to this whole idea that we need to, we don't want to have Cedar Rapids turn into a ghost town. I mean, I grew up here in the the 80s and 90s, and downtown Cedar Rapids was on the decline for sure. And in the last 5 to 10 years, to see where it's at, it's awesome. And I'm wondering, in your mind, what is the role of the city government when it comes to kind of helping to attract employers and attract people, keeping millennials here, things like that?
Like I told Ron many years ago, if the price gets low enough, investors will show up. So the city bought it at rock bottom prices. Really, if it had been lower, maybe we would have gotten some other investors. But I understand how we got here, and I yield to all the logic, whether they use the right surveys or not. My question now is we're here. Are we really going to stay in the hotel business? Now I've heard Ron say, well, we're going to look to sell it, or hopefully we will sell it. I'm not only for that, but then why aren't we partitioning this right now? Why isn't DoubleTree making an offer, or some other group? Maybe we'll get together, Brian, and we'll make an offer on just the hotel, and we will manage the arena for a cost. But that's not being discussed yet. So if I have to yield to the millions of dollars over budget, and the fact that this private-public partnership gave no risk to any private group that I can see, what I feel happened is there was a lot of people that, for good intentions, waited for a time when the government money came through. It did, caused by a flood, which was horrible. But now, why aren't we doing competitive bidding? Why wasn't both surveys looked at? And I put it to everybody, including our mayor, because there was money to be made. And I don't like the fact that we are sitting here now talking about how we got here and not putting plans in place to get out of the hotel business.
Let's talk about where we're going to go then. I won't be mayor when these decisions are made, but we signed contracts with DoubleTree for them to manage the facility. So we have contracts in place for them, and that's a great brand, DoubleTree by Hilton. Yep. We sold naming rights, U.S. Cellular Center, also with Pepsi, various naming rights. The Hall Perrine is giving us $250,000 a year. So we are raising some private money. So it isn't all government money. There's private money into that. I think for the foreseeable future, we'll probably see a couple more years where until we get the contracts all through the end of their life. But we've already had two companies, Jim, interested in purchasing the hotel. We had to sign non-disclosure agreements with them. One was a Chinese real estate company. So there is interest, and I think there will be going forward. What we'd like to do is we'd like to get the bonds, the debt paid down a little bit, so you get your debt down and your valuation goes up, and it ends up crossing that point. The last thing I want to do, or would recommend, is you sell the hotel and take a haircut, and then you don't make enough from the purchase to pay off the bonds. I wouldn't want to do that. So I think we just need a little more time. The hotel occupancy is going up. It's making money to pay the bonds off. The taxpayers aren't being asked to pay for this big monstrosity.
Right, and I obviously the whole idea behind it is to take those profits and help to cover some of the operating losses from the convention center and the cellular center. And back in 2011, along that line, city officials projected $500,000 in annual losses for the U.S. Cellular and Convention Complex. However, as of last year, the losses totaled $249,000. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that was my understanding. And is there any insight as to what is contributing to this decline in the losses? Well,
there's certainly, in the concert business, sometimes it's a hit or miss. We have some basic business. Say the girls' state volleyball tournament. That is an annual event that brings in money into our community. Had we not remodeled the U.S. Cell Center, we would have lost that girls' volleyball tournament. We almost lost it. We were able to save it a couple years out of the ice arena. Really, these concerts, sometimes these concerts can really make you a lot of money, and sometimes they're a bust. We're going to be in competition now with concert because Coralville is getting a brand new arena. Yep. And it's being funded, Jim, by the state is giving them a big grant to go in competition.
And I would oppose
with
that.
us. Yeah. Well, we weren't too happy about it, but they end up receiving that grant. They're going to have a different management company than us, but we're concerned about saturation in the market, of course.
Are we done paying DoubleTree from the city taxes? My understanding is there was still some line item budgets, and I didn't go into details, but Lisa, she shared with me that we're still paying DoubleTree some kind of loss money.
Well, we're putting money into a sinking fund And that was something the city had historically not done. And a sinking fund basically gives you a pool of money to take care of maintenance issues, deferred maintenance. We say, well, Jim has mentioned we're over budget. We were over expectations. Yes, we were way over. One of the reasons is, as you get into these old buildings like that, sometimes you didn't think you were going to have to replace the entire plumbing or heating sections of the building, and we had to.
But our contracts with the private sector clearly had not to exceed dollar figures. Why did the council not hold the line on those not to exceed numbers?
Well, sometimes, Jim, when private sector companies do most of our roads, they do most of our sewer, most of our bridges, they'll come up with what they think is an estimate. And then they get into the actual work and they come up with unexpected, and they have change orders. Sometimes it says, we didn't realize we were going to run into this particular problem, and you come back with a change order. So it's never perfect.
The number one reason we shouldn't be in this kind of private-public sector partnership is because there was no competitive bidding from my point of view. Yes, Mr. Frew did an admirable job, but there was no competitive bidding. If it had been competitively bid with not to exceed costs, we wouldn't be talking about this kind of overrun. But because we didn't shed that risk into the private sector, now the city eats it.
But we did competitively bid. We asked Pepsi and Coke if they wanted to have the naming rights. We asked other organizations.
I'm talking about the renovations.
All the construction stuff, yeah, that was all bid out, and everything was bid on that contract. And some of the, even the hotel management was bid. Originally, Kinset was maybe going to get it, and then we end up going with Doubletree because we like that brand. But we're in agreement here. We're all saying the same thing, that it isn't really a core function of the city, but under the extraordinary circumstances of the flood and this recession, we really needed to step in and do something. We did. And long term, we feel that's an appreciating asset, and it's also a revenue producing. Sometimes people say, why didn't you take that $44 million on the hotel and go fix up streets? They ask me that a lot. Mm-hmm. I said, well, when you borrow money, you got to pay it back. So if we borrow $44 million to go fix up streets, we got to pay for that with higher property taxes.
Right.
So we borrowed money to fix up the hotel, and the revenue from people that sleep at the hotel is paying for it.
One thing, so that's excellent, and I wanted to focus in a little bit on the convention center, because it's been touted as kind of the key to the hotel's continued growth, right? I mean, because you're attracting people to the town for several days, hopefully, for a convention, versus a concert in which, you're going to attract mainly local people that may not be staying overnight. So I guess my question is the convention center successful? Are we attracting these multi-day events that is going to, and I would assume when a potential buyer for the Doubletree, they're going to look very closely at the success of the convention center. What are the numbers looking like? Are we successful in that with the convention center and attracting these
well,
conventions?
we are successful at attracting conventions. We've had the League of Cities there. We've had a lot of even local. GoDaddy had their Christmas party in the convention center. So to answer your question is, yes, we are. Are there people there every day of the week? No, that's not the case. I don't know that we'll ever have conventions 365 days a year.
I think there was 11 last year is a number that comes to my mind as far as these multi-day bigger conventions.
We get big sporting events, NCAA wrestling tournaments come in. People certainly come in and use the arena. We've got the soccer team, the Rampage. We've got the football team that comes in there. Rockwell rented out for some big Legos event last year, a Robot event. Yep. I mean, so we are using the facility, but the Paramount Theater doesn't have a concert there every night, right. And the ice arena doesn't have someone, playing a hockey game every night.
Brian, what are your thoughts on our convention center, Cellular Center, and are we attracting enough of these conventions, concerts, venue, whatever they may be, to continue to make the hotel profitable and hopefully attract a buyer?
Well, it's Whether it's enough, I'm not the one to say whether they're attracting enough. I mean, the purpose is of convention centers, I think, in general, they're accepted that they're generally not money makers. So I don't think Cedar Rapids is expecting to make money from its convention center. But, I guess I don't know, certainly when they do have big events, you see downtown filled with people, you see, you can't find a parking space, all the ramps are full. So when they fill up, it's really helping the downtown, whether or not it's, I'm not exactly sure how many nights a year or how many, events a year they should be having.
Jim, I think
when we start to talk about conventions, I want to make sure we're focused on what I call the right kind of convention, because in the early surveys, they talked about bringing money outside the city in.
Right.
So with respect, when we start talking about local businesses using it for events or parties, if we're not bringing money outside of Cedar Rapids in, those are just events. Those aren't the kind of things that were in the survey where we're supposed to be bringing in big dollars. I just worry that when we set the expectations that local events can help cash flow this, those are expectations that are going to keep us where we're not going to be able to sell the hotel, in my opinion.
Are we too dependent on local events?
No, but there are some great local events that we've had at this convention center. One is a local company, Berthel Fisher. They're a national broker dealer, stock market activity. They brought all their broker dealers to Cedar Rapids. They weren't able to do that in the past because we didn't have, a big enough facility. So that would be what you would call a new opportunity.
And that's a great example.
And we compete with other cities, obviously in the state of Iowa for Iowa conventions. We had the Iowa Corn Convention here last summer. Their bus was out front and people were all meandering around. So we'll get some of the statewide conventions and get them on a circuit, maybe get them every 3 to 4 years, but national stuff we're bidding for.
So we're kind of getting close to the end of the show here, but Jim, I'm wondering, with your group, the Iowa Conservative Union, is there a situation in which you feel that a purchase like the DoubleTree is justified using taxpayer money, or do you feel like this is just a unique situation?
I go back to my concerns about public-private sector partnerships. This one was riddled with risk for our city. In my opinion, we went to a local gentleman or group, I believe it's called Fru National. I don't believe we competitively bid that group. And I do remember a push to try and keep our money local, but if we're going to keep our money local at the risk of it not looking right, it didn't smell right. The contracts that were written back in 2010 were wonderful contracts, but I've already expressed my problem with there was no risk aversion. And when we're starting to talk about public-private sector partnerships, the private sector has to bear more risk.
The city did take a risk. Jim's right. We did. We took that risk. It was a calculated risk. And we knew there might be some political fallout from it, but it was a calculated risk, and that risk has paid off handsomely. Look at all of the activity in the downtown with the brand new United Fire building going up, what Skogman's going to do up the hill. CRST just finished that. All the development of the Guarantee Bank property, of a new hotel, a boutique hotel. I mean, we are seeing a lot of activity. And why this is so important for taxpayers that don't live in the downtown is this is the highest property value. So they pay the most in tax. So when you have that commercial growth, it lessens the burden on homeowners.
So it's kind of, you have to spend money to make money is kind of the idea here. But, and I would agree, the downtown is, every time I go down there, I'm just amazed the new business that opens up and the foot traffic that's down there and just the energy. And so, but again, gentlemen, I thank you very much for a lively discussion this morning. And again, I thank you for joining us again today. and hope you have a wonderful Sunday. Take care now. Bye-bye.